This week on The Watchman, from leading Israel's internal security service to serving as a respected voice on defense issues in the Israeli Knesset, Avi Dichter has stood on the front lines of Israel's battle against terrorism for years. He joins us today to share what he's learned and what lies ahead for Israel and America in the struggle against radical Islam.
The Middle East is going through an earthquake. It's a real earthquake. I don't know how much it's on the Richter scale, but it's definitely 9 on the Dichter scale.
Whether intifadas, Iran, or ISIS, Avi Dichter has seen it all. Get ready to hear his expert insights today on The Watchman, only with Christians United for Israel and only on TBN. And welcome to a very special edition of The Watchman. Over the centuries, this city, Jerusalem, has been destroyed, conquered, and reconquered dozens of times. What was true 3,000 years ago is still true today. Whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, or ISIS, Israel has no shortage of enemies on every border. And yet, the Jewish state continues to not only survive, but thrive. God Almighty has placed men and women of great courage and wisdom in crucial leadership positions here in Israel who have helped Israel weather the storm. Avi Dichter is one of those men. He was the leader of Israel's Shin Bet security service during the Second Intifada, when a horrific wave of suicide bombings by Hamas and other terrorist groups left hundreds of Israelis dead. Today, Dichter is a member of the Israeli Knesset and chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. From threats within to threats without, Avi Dichter has seen it all. Take a look. Well, Minister Dichter, thank you so much for joining us here on The Watchman on this beautiful set in San Antonio.
Thank you very much also for inviting me here.
You know, Minister, it bothers me, it amuses me, I have to say, to see the world oftentimes lay the conflict in the Middle East at the feet of Israel. We saw this UN resolution recently calling half of Jerusalem illegally occupied by Israel. Can you talk about this concept where the world is blaming Israel for the problems in the Middle East?
Yeah, it's a very good point, because up until, let's say, 6 years ago, when we used to be blamed for anything that happens in the Middle East, we said, all right, we know it's not true, but it was hard to fight back. But over the last 6 years, the Middle East is going through an earthquake. It's a real earthquake. I don't know how much it's on the Richter scale, but it's definitely 9 on the Dichter scale. It's if you take Libya crashed, Egypt went through a revolution and then through a military coup when they kicked off the Muslim Brotherhood. It has nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict, nor Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. Yemen was conquered by Houthis, a proxy, Iranian proxy, a Shiite proxy, has nothing to do with Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Iraq crashed, nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Syria, 600,000 Syrians got killed, mainly civilians. 2.5 million Syrians got injured. 12 million refugees, about 5 million outside Syria. It has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Why is Syria and the chaos unfolding there such a big deal, not just for Israel, but for the West?
Because Syria is part of the chain, the Iranian chain that started from Iran via Iraq, Syria, Lebanon. They tried to build this chain, the northern axis, in order to confront all threats from Turkey and from the other countries. So they started to send troops from Iran, Revolutionary Guard Corps. They were not efficient because it's a different war. So they brought Hezbollah. And here comes the Israeli point of view, because we do know that Hezbollah, well trained in fighting this kind of fightings, and they were brought by Iran into Syria, and they changed the situation for a while. They blocked the rebels, and meanwhile, Bashar al-Assad started to be more stable in Syria, but it was not enough. Then Russia understood that they have a very good chance to get back to the Middle East. And they surprised all intelligence services, the Israelis, the Americans, the Europeans, and the Arabs. One day they came. They came to Tartus port, the only port they have in the Mediterranean. They built the Hamimim airport and brought combat jets and started to attack. Now, I had a chat with the Russians. I'm the chairman of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and Defense, and when I talk to my colleagues, so it's a very interesting difference in terminology. I talked about Iran, our enemy state, while they talk about Iran, our ally. I spoke about Hezbollah, the terror organization, while they spoke about Hezbollah, their partner. Because they are using the carpet bombings in Aleppo, and Hezbollah is fighting on the ground. They have today about 20,000 terrorists collected from all countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, and they are fighting.
Minister Dichter, that is a very important point, I think, because we hear so much about ISIS gathering fighters from around the world, but Iran also is gathering Shiite jihadists to Syria to fight alongside them. From around the world, Afghanistan, Pakistan, as you mentioned.
To make it clear, Russia, Syria, Iran, they don't attack ISIS. They attack what we call the rebels, and they call the terrorists. The Syrian faction who are fighting against the regime, they are labeled as terrorists, and that's why they fight against them. They don't fight ISIS. Meanwhile, we have ISIS in Sinai. It's a different story. That they are attacking the Egyptian police and the Egyptian military troops. They are very effective. They are killing, literally killing security men, Egyptians on a daily basis.
Yeah, you know, Mr. Dichter, that's at Israel's southern border in Sinai. I want to get back to the north a little bit later, talk some Hezbollah. But when I think of Israel's south, I also think about Gaza and the Hamas threat there. It's a threat you know intimately. You've dealt with heading the Shin Bet in previous years. Could you tell us right now about the strength level of Hamas?
First of all, we are used to call them a terror organization. It's an army of terrorists. That's the right name that we have to give them, because since 2001, they started to be highly connected with Iran, supported by Iranian money, guidelines, weapons smuggled via Sinai into Gaza Strip, and tools how to build those rockets and sophisticated rockets, some kind of UAVs, etc. So what made the change over the last year is that Hamas started to think not just defensive, but offensive. And the tunnels that they are digging from Gaza Strip crossing into Israel, that's a very significant threat that we have to confront it. We're doing all efforts in order to make sure that those tunnels will be blocked, and hopefully we'll be able to locate them. It's a lot of tunnels. It's thousands of kilometers inside Gaza Strip. They have the logistic tunnels, they have the defensive tunnels, and they have the offensive tunnels. The offensive are aiming to enable troops from Gaza, from Hamas, to penetrate Israel and to take a military post or a Jewish settlement, and to kill people, to take hostages, to bring them back to Gaza Strip, and to show a kind of a victory. But I'm telling you, in my eyes, it will take time, not too long, when we'll have the capabilities to make sure that those tunnels will become the biggest cemetery for Hamas terrorists.
It's amazing, the tunnel phenomenon. I mean, Hamas was utilizing suicide bombings during the Second Intifada, which you helped defeat. Then the rockets and missiles, and now the tunnels. It seems that they are always adapting to terrible new means of terror. One of those means, Minister, is the car rammings that we see. You know, it's interesting. We've seen these truck rammings in Nice, France, in Berlin, Germany, and we've seen them in Israel. It seems like every new terror tactic is tried, unfortunately, first in Israel. Tell us about this new phase of this terror campaign against Israel.
There's nothing different from suicide bombing than suicide stabbing. The only difference is that those who are carrying a bomb, they detonate themselves in order to kill people. While those who has a knife or a car that bumps into people, he knows he's going to be killed. In 90% of the cases, they are getting killed. And if you try to analyze what happened, what's the difference between Berlin, Nice, and Jerusalem? The fact that in Berlin, 10 got killed, in Nice, 10 got killed, in Jerusalem, 4 Israeli soldiers got killed. The reason why? Because the minute after it started, 3 people, 2 officers, 1 female, and a civilian, opened fire, killed the driver a minute after he started his terror attack, and only, if I may say, only 4 people got killed. They blocked the terror attack and prevented tens of people to be killed.
Minister Dichter, so much to talk about. We're going to head to the break now, but ISIS, Iran, Hezbollah, and we are with the perfect person, folks, to talk about it. Minister Avi Dichter, coming up much more after the break with him. It's the Watchman, it's Christians United for Israel, only right here on TBN. Don't move.
Christians United for Israel was created for such a time as this. God has raised Kufai up at this moment in history to stand between Israel and those who seek to destroy the Jewish state.
Israel's enemies are on the move. As dark clouds gather on the horizon, tell the world you proudly stand with Israel. Be a courageous voice for biblical unity and moral clarity when you join Christians United for Israel. Show your love for the people of Zion with this beautiful symbol of unending support for Israel.
Wear the pin and join Kufai, a movement of over 3 million defenders of Israel who are raising a torch of truth to defeat the darkness. Call the number on your screen or visit cufi.org/pin to receive your free pin that will show your proud support for Israel.
Minister Dichter, it's very interesting. We were talking during the break. We see these terror attacks now, the stabbings, car rammings, but suicide bombing, to your mind, remains really one of the most difficult threats to counter. And you know this very well, obviously, heading up Shin Bet during the Second Intifada, the wave of suicide bombings against innocent Israeli men, women, and children. Talk about why suicide bombing is so difficult for an intelligence service to combat.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Suicide bombing, you see no tools, no intention. In security life, what you are looking for is to find the man with the tool, a pistol, a gun, a hand grenade, and intention. He's going to use it. He's opening fire, so you can block him, and you are allowed even to open fire in order to kill him. I don't know even one case in suicide bombing that someone opened fire to block a suicide bomber just because he suspected him to be such a suicide bomber. So that's the nightmare of all security and intelligence services. And because the people that are being recruited to carry the bomb inside a bus, inside a mall, inside a restaurant, or with a car bomb, they're not that sophisticated people. They just get trained for a very short time, were recruited at the last days, and were sent, male or female, to carry out their attack.
In terms of the security minister, talk about the role that, we see satellite imagery so much today for intelligence. Talk about the role that good old-fashioned, on-the-ground human intelligence in these dangerous areas plays.
Yeah, over the last years, when people started to carry cell phones and any other devices, electronic devices, computers, and everything today is computerized, everything is digitized, which enables security operations and security apparatuses and intelligence services to be flooded with information from all kind of collecting information they can imagine. So each one of us, you and me, 20 years ago, we barely could talk with someone unless we were at office or at home. Public phone, it was when we were on the way from one place to another. Over the last 20 years, you are sending information whether you talk or not. Each one is carrying a cell phone and a smartphone, and you are a transmitter by definition.
Last question before we go to the break. ISIS and this global phenomenon, this ideology, how has it been a game changer? Has it been a game changer in your mind? Their ideology, they're taking lumps now in the Middle East, they're losing territory, but their ideology, the caliphate, ruthless jihad, how has that galvanized jihadists around the world?
Well, I'm less threatened by ISIS than by Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood are much more extremists. They are sitting on a profound ideology started in 1928.
They're the granddaddy.
And they have spiritual leaders, and they have many millions of supporters, let alone terrorists. ISIS was a very shallow ideology. It started as an Islamic state, then they understood its state has borders. And they want to make sure that the borders will be the Islam borders. So that's why they moved from state to Islamic caliphate. And I think that their end is going to be grosso modo like Carlos the Jackal, if you remember from the 60s and 70s. Yeah. Nobody remembers today who was Carlos the Jackal. He was the nightmare of all security agencies in the world, let alone in Europe. Then came Osama bin Laden. I think that in 10, 20 years from now, if you'll ask people who was Osama bin Laden, they will ask you, Osama who? Pardon, we don't know the name. I think that Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the commander of ISIS, in 20 years he will be a piece of history. I always recommend people, let alone security agencies, to focus on movements like Muslim Brotherhood. They are moving for many years, it's 90 years since established. They have a very profound ideology. Their strategy is very, very extremist. And we have to be very careful about it.
Minister Dichter, very important point about the Muslim Brotherhood, or really all this ideology today comes from. It all comes out of the Brotherhood and Hamas, who we talked about, the self-identified Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah, Hamas defines themselves officially in their charter from 1988 as Muslim Brotherhood branch on Palestine.
They are the Ikhwan. Much more with Avi Dichter after the break. We're talking Iran and Hezbollah. You will not want to miss this. It's Kufi, it's the Watchman, only right here on TBN. Stick around. Israel's enemies are united in their goal to destroy the Jewish state. They all share one purpose: to wipe Israel off the map. Evil forces never stop working to isolate, delegitimize, and weaken Israel. In the face of evil, Christians must not remain silent. Supporting Israel is not a political issue, it is a biblical issue. And you can make a difference in your church, on college campuses, and on Capitol Hill.
In 10 years, you've gathered more than 3 million members and are active on more than 300 college campuses. Kufi never shies away from standing with Israel, from standing with the truth.
Become part of the largest pro-Israel organization in America and help Christians united for Israel push back against the darkness as a beacon of truth. Join over 3 million defenders of Israel when you visit our website at cufi.org and sign the Israel Pledge. Together, we'll make sure that Israel never stands alone. We're talking jihad, terror, security threats. We have to talk about the Iranian regime, the foremost sponsor of terrorism in the world. It seems, Minister, that over the past few years here in the West, there has been a tendency to say, well, you know, the Iran nuclear deal neutralized Iran. They are moderating. We can deal with them. Can you talk about how this Iranian regime has not changed its spots?
Yeah, no doubt about the fact that Iran, for the first time since the State of Israel was established in 1948, Iran created an existential threat against Israel. We never faced before an existential threat. How you measure threat? By tools and intention. Now, the intention was given on record by the highest level in Iran when the president stated loud and clear, we intend to destroy the State of Israel. Now, Iran is sitting 2 countries between Iran and Israel. So there's no way to destroy the State of Israel unless you are using special tools. The special tools are nuclear bombs. There was no debate amongst all intelligence services, Israelis, Americans, Europeans, that Iran is on the track to build nuclear bombs. The deal tried to put it off only the development and building of the bombs. It doesn't deal with the long-range missiles that still are being developed. And we hear every week or two about a new launching of a long-range missile. They crossed the 2,000 kilometers distance today. And we all know that they are built in order to carry a warhead that one day will be probably a nuclear warhead.
You made a great point earlier where you talked about how Syria is so central to Iran, that Tehran, Damascus, Beirut, Bekaa Valley pipeline providing weapons to the likes of Hezbollah. Tell us about the severity of this Hezbollah threat. It seems like it often goes unnoticed here in the West, but Hezbollah has over 100,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. How concerned are you about Hezbollah continuing to arm and up the distance of their rockets and missiles?
Yeah, Hezbollah, we have their participation in Syria contains two aspects. One is good for Israel, one is bad for Israel. Let's start with the good one for Israel. They've lost up until today in Syria, in the clashes with the rebels, they've lost about 1,700 terrorists, more than they lost in all clashes with the Israeli army. 1,700 means about 7,000 terrorists got injured. So these are the good news. The bad news for Israel that Hezbollah over the last 3-4 years, they're getting trained to fight in Syria in big units with artillery support, aviation support, whether it's Russian or Syrian. So it means that the next round, if God forbid it's going to happen between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, it's going to be different. That's why we are getting prepared for a different round whenever it's going to happen.
Before we go to the break, Minister, I wanted to ask you, for an American, predominantly American audience, we're seen around the world, but America, obviously, Christians United for Israel, we're based here. All of these organizations, these terror organizations, and the likes of the Iranian regime, they have American blood on their hands, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, you think of the Beirut barracks bombing, 1983. Why should every American care? Of course, Israel, there's geographical proximity to these threats on your borders. Why should every American care about what we're talking about? How does it affect the average American, the average Westerner, who oftentimes seems to be asleep today?
You know, we have a very basic mistake made by many countries. When they think that, all right, now we have the rebels in Syria are fighting against Bashar al-Assad, so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. It works in English, it works in Hebrew, it doesn't work in Arabic. In Arabic, they say, "Ana wa akhuya ala ibn ammi, wa ana wa ibn ammi al-gharib," which means me and my brother against our cousin, and me and my cousin against the stranger. We shall always remain strangers. We, I mean the Americans, the Europeans, the Christians, the Jews, the Israelis, we shall always remain strangers. We better don't forget it.
Coming up, what drove Avi Dichter to devote his life to defending the State of Israel? Find out the powerful reason behind his mission after the break. Christians United for Israel was created for such a time as this. God has raised Kufai up at this moment in history to stand between Israel and those who seek to destroy the Jewish state.
Israel's enemies are on the move. As dark clouds gather on the horizon, tell the world you proudly stand with Israel. Be a courageous voice for biblical unity and moral clarity when you join Christians United for Israel. Show your love for the people of Zion with this beautiful symbol of unending support for Israel.
Wear the pin and join Kufai, a movement of over 3 million defenders of Israel who are raising a torch of truth to defeat the darkness. Call the number on your screen or visit cufi.org/pin to receive your free pin that will show your proud support for Israel.
Minister Dichter, you've been steps ahead in your roles in the intelligence world, in the shadowy world of intelligence over your career. You are the son of Holocaust survivors. This is not just a job for you, is it? This is a mission, what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I took it as a mission because I left with my sister to 2 Holocaust survivors that lost literally all their family in a village. Used to be Poland, later became Ukraine post the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement. And for the first time I went there last year to see the place where my parents grew up as kids. And I went with my relative from the States, from Detroit, that his father and his uncle survived the Holocaust. They were secured by Christian farmer primats, young primats. And we went there to see where it started all. And you come to a village, a very small village, that 1 kilometer from the Jewish cemetery, near the ghetto that used to be, all along the village to a mass grave where in 22nd of August 1942, all Jews were taken, marched all along the village, came to the mass grave and were shot 6 after 6 after 6 after 6 by the Gestapo. So it's all my family. My full name is Abraham Moshe, which is my grandfather who was killed there, and all my cousins. I never had grandparents, never had cousins. And for me, like many other Israelis, it's a mission. You know, it's when I say Jews will never be killed again just because they are Jews.
Mr. Dichter, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. A true watchman on the wall for Israel and the civilized world. Thank you so much, Mr. Dichter. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Folks, what a privilege to sit down with Avi Dichter. Our team at Christians United for Israel counts Minister Dichter as a good friend, and we're standing shoulder to shoulder with him and the rest of Israel's leadership as they take on these very serious security threats. And guess what? We want you to stand with us. Visit cufi.org or call the number on your screen to become a member of CUFI and join a mighty movement of God that is 3.3 million members strong and growing every day. Folks, only God could do this. Only God could raise CUFI up to become America's largest pro-Israel organization in just 11 short years for such a time as this. Remember, Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey, surrounded by enemies on all sides that want to wipe it off the map. As a follower of Jesus, you need to take a stand. In the book of Ezekiel, God Almighty says that if the watchman sees the enemy coming and does not sound the alarm to warn the people, he will hold the watchman accountable for their deaths. We're doing our part here at CUFI, bringing you insights from modern-day watchmen like Avi Dichter. Now we're asking you to do yours and join us. Well, thanks for being with us this week on The Watchman from Jerusalem. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.